Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Czarecah Oropilla, otherwise known as Aya, and I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at Western Norway University of Applied Sciences and one of the co-leaders of EX-PED-LAB project and usually this podcast's host. Today's session is something truly special. You're not only attending a live webinar, but you're also participating in a special recording of our podcast, PedPod by EX-PED-LAB, which is co-produced by HVL's Medialab. Particular and special shout out or mention to Czarecah Grindheim, who's helping us each time. And this episode stands out because it itself is an example of responsible pedagogical innovation. By combining research dissemination and public engagement in one dynamic format, we are demonstrating new ways of translating research into practice, making it accessible, transparent, and socially responsible. So for podcast listeners' information, today's webinar podcast is organized through NORBARN, or Norchild in English, Norway's National Research School for Early Childhood Education. NORBARN is a collaborative initiative involving several universities and organizations in the field of early childhood education and care in Nordic countries. It aims to strengthen early childhood education sectors through talent development and the cultivation of transferable skills. NORBARN provides PhD candidates with opportunities for networking in courses and facilitating dialogue between researchers and practitioners in the field of early childhood education. A very warm welcome to everybody in the webinar podcast session, Pedagogical and Responsible Innovation. What does it mean in early childhood teacher education? And today I'm very thrilled to be joined by two esteemed colleagues here to one of my side, because it's either left or right in your screen, is Professor Liv Torunn Grindheim, who is a leading researcher in early childhood studies, teacher education, and sustainability in education. She's affiliated with Kindo Research Center, and she leads the research group Kindergarten as an Arena for Cultural Formation. And here to my other side is Dr. Svein Gunnar Sjøtun, an associate professor at HVL's Handelshøyskolen. And his work focuses on innovation processes, leadership, and practice development in education settings, particularly how innovations can contribute to solving societal challenges and how actors can contribute to responsible and sustainable innovations through their practices. And together, they will guide us through today's topic, exploring how responsibility, economic, environmental, social, can and should be embedded within pedagogical innovation, particularly in early childhood teacher education. But first, some practical information before we start. Please note that only the presentation part will be recorded. The dialogue and the discussion afterwards will not be recorded. And the presentation's language will be in English, and Svein Gunnar and Liv Torunn will have around 20 to 25 minutes of presentation dialogue between themselves, and afterwards there will be a 5-minute reflection break for everybody. From that point on, the webinar podcast will not be recorded. And after the break, participants in the audience are encouraged to share 2-minute round on what does it mean for me and my project. And once everybody has shared something, there will be an open question and answer session. The dialogue and discussion afterwards can either be in Norwegian or in English, depending on your preference. And if you have any questions during or after the session, please feel free to reach out through the chat, which Hannah and I will be monitoring throughout. We are very excited for the discussion ahead, and we hope that you enjoy this hybrid experience of research, innovation, and reflection. So let's get started. Liv Torunn and Svein Gunnar, you have the floor and I will fade away.
Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. Hello, Liv Torunn again.
Hello.
We met a while ago, actually in a kindergarten for the first time. If you remember, it was a research project where kindergarten where my kids were. And then we are now also colleagues in Western Norway University of Applied Sciences. And then you came and invited me to a project application, which was very exciting. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't funded, but we are continuing to explore very exciting questions, which I'm very happy for, among other things in this, through this podcast that Aya has invited us to.
And so I thank you so much, Aya, for inviting us and for the nice introduction. And Svein Gunnar, it has been a pleasure working with you so far. And I'm so happy to go deeper into this pedagogical and responsible innovation approach. And one of my current research is about early childhood teacher education, where we try to surface taken for granted or invisible practices in early childhood teacher education to identify areas for innovation close to the involved person's experiences and practices, to what we call concurrent collaborative autoethnography. It's 15 persons at our university is involved, and we are engaged in the research process about our own practices steadily, but mix individual and collective research activities and disseminations. We also involve research materials to capture in-service teachers' perspective and practices and students' perspective and practices. It is a part of an international project where also teacher educators from Iceland and USA is involved. And this is so close to this responsible innovation thing. So that's what lead my interest to what you are into. And let's see. Today we will have organized our presentation like this, very traditionally. Start with background and research question and give a kind of we explain what responsible innovation might be and explore the relation between responsible innovation and pedagogical innovation. And then we would like to see and go a little more into how responsible and pedagogical innovation could be performed in early childhood teacher education.
Yeah, I think it's important also to say that this is early work, and this is kind of like a way to explore these issues further. Because I also think that these concepts and these how you can integrate this will actually can yield very fruitful results, which I believe to be both of use for research on early childhood. I always say childhood teacher education, but also innovation studies, which is the kind of discipline that I more represent. But that can also be served by such a way of integrating.
A win-win situation.
A win-win situation.
We hope.
That's great.
So this is work in progress, sure.
And of course, we hope this will be useful to you guys as well, listening in here, that this can also maybe spark some interest in exploring some of these things further.
The reason why we find this interesting is, of course, the problems that we meet in early childhood teacher education that has low status. And yesterday we had the numbers for people for applications for the bachelor program, and it's a falling number of students also this year. And of course, that leads to productive changes and reforms to be asked for. And tried, I say in brackets, implemented. But a critique of these reforms is that they are initiated and driven from stakeholders outside the field of practice, and often appear to be neither efficient nor relevant. So several researchers like us and teachers ask for innovation that is close to ongoing practices and involved actors. And also innovation that are associated with creativity and capacity to find new approaches driven from ideas that emerge in social relations, not only on individual basis. And these latter kinds of innovation are seldom reported in research papers and most often not theorized. So that's why we ask, how can pedagogical and responsible innovation be of value for early childhood teacher education? So, Svein Gunnar, you are the expert in innovation. So what is it?
I don't know. Well, no, I mean, I can try to give a very brief introduction to what it is and how it is developed. To kind of start off, innovation is, of course, a way of perceiving new things, new products, new services, new ways of organizing, or new processes, which is kind of put together by existing knowledge or new knowledge in new combinations. That is the very sort of general kind of introduction of the term innovation. So very briefly, I come from sort of innovation studies, but I have background in geography, but now I'm working at a section of innovation studies here at the HVL, and I've been working a lot with this concept now for 10 years and maybe more. And what, of course, is that it has developed, but it originally has had a very sort of economic connotation. So it's been very closely associated with how you create new products or services, technologies that are then sold in the market. And it's about sort of the initial thinking around innovation was always about stimulating to growth. So you have competition, private actors, industries, firms, wanting to make some new things under competitive pressure and then grow, become richer.
Okay.
But of course, the kind of thinking of innovation has changed, as has the kind of, I suppose, empirical areas of investigation for innovation. So what you mentioned here earlier, and that is something that I don't have a slide on, but I can tell you now. From having been seen as a very linear process, innovation is also in studies of innovation now conceived of as a very relational, dynamic phenomenon. So it's very messy. It's very difficult to kind of always map the exact processes in which an innovation come into being. And it's also extended beyond that to much more than looking at economic value as the kind of end in itself, and creating profit for shareholders through innovations. So, like you see here, innovation studies or studies of innovation is increasingly kind of incorporating other types of values into the studies: societal value, environmental value, ethical value, and so on. And this has given rise to many different sort of currents within innovation studies. And like you see on the list here, it's about sort of now innovations are not conceived of anymore in these perspectives as being sold in a market or being kind of applied in a market. By the way, that's a very important distinction between invention and innovation. Innovation is only an innovation when it's applied. So a lot of ideas become just inventions, but it's when it's applied, most often in the market, that we talk about an innovation. So a lot of good ideas can never become innovations. But also, applied here can also mean that you use it in like a public sector situation, for example, in that it creates some sort of value for, let's say, a kindergarten or the kindergarten etat, the sector of sector sector. And this is kind of been introduced now to public sector social innovation. There's been talk about like how can we conceive of innovations as solving these big missions, creating directionality in which the private and public and even the civil sector innovate and cooperate together. There's a lot of perspectives there. I'm not going to go through all of them. but they kind of address these issues, extend like more value, interaction, reflection in different ways. But I would like to kind of take you through the concept of responsible innovation, which has kind of provided a lot of, has been very popular, especially in the EU and even and in different sort of national research contexts. So very briefly, responsible innovation. I'm talking a lot now. I'm gonna try to keep this brief. But very briefly, it's a way of looking at innovation processes as not only securing a sustainable outcome, be that environmentally outcome, economic or social, or of course that this is seen as simultaneously addressing all these issues, but it's also about looking at the innovation processes themselves, in which we have to critically reflect on how we include people beyond the usual suspects, to put it that way. Often in innovation studies, you think of the innovators and you think about the firms and it can be public sector representatives and so on. But if we take a responsible innovation approach, we also want to include other organizations that aren't necessarily directly involved usually in the processes, but which should be involved in the processes. We also have to try to anticipate the consequences of an innovation and reflect upon our own practices and how this contribute to, is it this contributing to better societal values and so on, or is it sort of addressing or challenging those? And of course, they also need to be responsive to the societal needs and so on. Yeah. Now I've talked a lot.
Yeah. What I really find interesting in what you tell, what catch me the first time you talked about this, was this, especially this anticipation, that you look into, even though it is called an innovation, it doesn't have to serve the needs or the aims or the values that we initially aimed at. So that's also what this insecurity or the unsecure elements that are so involved in, at least in teacher practices, in early childhood teacher practices, and because there's a lot of people involved.
Yeah.
And we can't know for sure how it will work out either. So this is, I find it interesting. So would you like me to talk about innovation in early childhood teacher education?
Yeah, I think you can give a good intro there rather than me. I think that's better that you do.
Yeah. That's why we cooperate.
That's true. I will, in a little while, I will be presenting this and you will be presenting responsible innovation.
In 10 years.
Yeah.
What we also will emphasize is that when doing innovation, the way we so far think about it, it's also important which context you are involved in. And relevant innovation in early childhood teacher education may differ from innovation in other areas or even differ from other kinds of educations. We know, for example, that knowledge about play and how to facilitate play is a signature for early childhood teachers. This is also mirrored in the content and working methods in early childhood teacher education, and should be so, of course, and actualize the importance to take the specific areas into account when aiming at a better education. This is our colleagues in drama. I've asked them for using the photos, and they agreed. So nice, it's play.
Yeah.
But let's see here. I'll continue a little more. Innovation is a rather new concept within early childhood teacher education. But however, the concept is mentioned in the framework plan for early childhood teacher education and is frequently asked for in research applications. Higher education in general is not considered innovative. Higher education is more often seen as something that is taking place in a well-organized institution that capture and cherish established knowledge. The institutions are often accused to stick to well-established ways to pass on this knowledge to younger generation, often as lectures performed by one teacher speaking and many students listening and taking notes. However, this is perhaps a saying, and at least the picture is now nuanced. Research in and among stakeholders in early childhood teacher education depicts a variety of practices that challenge established way to consider knowledge, ways to learn, and what to learn. These practices are labeled as educational innovation, action research, research and developing projects, systematic development of teaching, exploration, or just referred to as trying out a new way of teaching. Or as pedagogical innovation. But to our knowledge, implementing a new system at the institutional level or a reform at the national level is hardly labeled at all. These practices that can be seen as innovation, educational innovation, or pedagogical innovation, has generally remained under-theorized and thus limiting the value of practices and policy development beyond the specific higher education institution in which it takes place. Theorizing innovation must also be seen in relation to the problems that are to be solved, not only the context. On an overall, we have already pointed to some problems, but on an overall level, we see the problems that are to be met in early childhood teacher education as complex, or what is called wicked problem. This is problems where there is no single solution. It's problems that are rooted in societal challenges and involve a range of complex interactions in embedded and tangled systems that are always changing. Early childhood teacher education is seen as an institution that is crucial for meeting problems and demands in the contemporary society. We need good teachers to cherish and educate the youngest children, to help further develop our society and to find ways to structure and live meaningful lives in trust and solidarity. In our contemporary society, early childhood teacher education have demanded and the trust to take on this overwhelming responsibility. So we find the similarity between these overwhelming responsibility to solve wicked problem in early childhood teacher education and the emergence of responsible innovation interesting. There is a link here, I think.
2 minutes. Yeah, as we kind of mentioned earlier, we're still trying to come to terms with how we will approach this. And for this podcast, it's very good that we just get to discuss it with you guys as well, and to kind of see how it works. And we are also thinking about maybe, writing a paper and so on, and continuing working with this. But I think what Liv Torunn is saying, I think these two concepts have a lot of similarities between them. I also quite like the kind of focus in general on the learning aspect, which has been pointed out by a former colleague of mine who is now working back in Malmkunna, that precisely how to kind of approach learning and play even maybe. It could be interesting to explore further. But for now, I think the kind of more process-oriented, ethical, reflection around how one can learn from these processes in both concepts is very interesting to kind of look more into. And also what you're mentioning, this kind of more systemic approach to maybe through responsible innovation, having a more systemic approach through the challenges seen from the lens of pedagogical innovation. So yeah, I think it's very exciting that we can, and innovation studies and studies of other forms of innovation would be well served in order to introduce more concepts from the pedagogical disciplines, but also sort of empirically through early childhood teacher education.
Yeah.
Oh, oops! I think we're. It's so exciting here now that I think we're running out of time.
Are we running out of time? Okay. We could continue, yeah. As the overlap between responsible innovation and pedagogical innovation is quite big, due to our interest or our view.
Yeah.
But we look a little closer to what the differences might be. Okay, I can change the picture now.
Do we have a few more minutes?
Yeah. Okay. As we say, pedagogical innovation will probably also be responsible. The overacting emphasis on responsibility is in line with the pedagogical mandate for teachers at any level. However, we see responsible innovation as broader than pedagogical innovation, and pedagogical innovation as closely connected to the subject pedagogy. Our aim is to embrace all the subjects present in early childhood teacher education in what is called a heterotelic education, an education where the subject as so is not the essence, but how the subjects provide approaches beyond their subject knowledge. Knowledge that contribute to the professional practices that the students are to be qualified for. To reach these aims, also more than subjects, transdisciplinarity or singular subject is needed. It takes more to qualify teachers, like ways to organize the daily practices in early childhood teacher education. It calls for staff that is involved in administrative tasks, leaders, students' contributions, artifacts, research and researchers, etc., all responsible for the education to the best for our children. Several stakeholders are needed also beyond the teaching staff to identify where and how to implement responsible, ethical and sustainable solutions. We call for students, in-service teachers, lectors, for all the relevant subjects, professors, researchers, administrative staff and leaders to be involved. Responsibility when aiming at innovation should be an overall approach, beyond the different groups of stakeholders as well as in ways of organizing early childhood teacher education. So the last is about how it could be implemented, but we could do that very briefly. Yeah, it's all about involving more stakeholders, having the ethical and value-based approach, and also trying to go beyond here and now, like the imaginative workshops
And it also requires, and that's what we're working on now, kind of parallel to this. I think it's important that we would try to get a thorough, systematic understanding of how exactly these concepts could inform each other, not for the sake of just, theoretical novelty, but in order to tease out what actually is the contribution of this integration.
Yeah.
And then, of course, to apply this into more practical ideas and aspects later on.
To meet societal challenges.
Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.